One. Which teams do you so much? So I'll do a little introducing there. However, they will follow. Yeah, they just follow. Just oversee. Usually say something nice about the talk, and then the two of both of you say some. You've been watching other videos, you come and just acknowledge him and say thank you for. No, at the very end, they will call you. just think about 10, 15 seconds what you're gonna say to speak. All right. It's time. I think that they're all here. Yeah. All right, let's settle down so we can get started. Can you hear me? Yep. Okay, if you can sit down and we can get started. Let's get started. So what day is today? What week is this? It's the last week of the program. So how many days left? Are you all stressed out? Are you still having fun? Yeah, okay. This is the last week, and that means we have some international visiting teams with us this week. So I'd like to acknowledge them. We have a team from Greece. Can you raise your hands? All right, okay. We have a team from Italy. All right, so let's welcome them. We have a team from Japan. All right, let's give them a warm welcome. Yeah. So, what is BWSI? Oh, you must be really tired. What is BWSI? All right. So today we have another wonderful, wonderful seminar speaker today. It is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Keoki Jax from MITRE. He is the Senior Vice President and General Manager of MITRE National Security Sector. Keoki has been just an incredible supporter of BWSI for the last 10 years. And without his support, we would not be where we are today. He was a great big supporter when he was at Lockheed Martin. And when he came over to MITRE, he continued to support the program, and it's been expanded. You know that 3 of the courses are being led by staff from MITRE, and we'd like to thank him for that. On a personal note, he's been a great colleague and a great mentor and great supporter and great believer in me professionally, or a lot of activities with the BWSI. So I'd like to personally thank Keoki for that. And with that, let's give him a warm welcome.
Well, thank you, Bob. Can everybody hear me in the back? Sound good? Fantastic. I'm Keoki Jackson. I'm with a company called MITRE. So I know we're supporting a few of the teams here. Who's embedded security back here today? So I'm sorry, I stopped by the classroom, but I only caught a couple of folks. So I meant to catch you earlier. But, and so anybody else is the MITRE team doing okay for you guys? All right, thank you. So does anybody know what the MITRE Corporation is? Maybe I'll give a quick introduction on that. But my intent here is to really talk a little bit about my experience, starting kind of where you are. And I went to MIT as an undergraduate. I thought I'd be here for 4 years. I ended up being here for 11 years. I, kind of like step by step went on and did a master's and a PhD. I got to work with amazing people like Bob over my career here. So yeah, so I run this part of MITRE, but the reality is at this time of year, basically I work for Bob and make sure that we do everything we can to that BWSI is successful every year. So MITRE Corporation, that's a little bit of an origin story. So everybody knows MIT, here we are. MIT has this very famous child, I guess you could call it, called the MIT Lincoln Laboratory, which has just done amazing work in a whole variety of areas, especially national security for many, many years. And of course, Bob, you know Bob as sort of the man of BWSI, the leader, the instructor, but he's also a legend in many areas of national security. And so, and he has been a great mentor to many of us over the years. So in 1958, there was this program. Has anybody heard of Golden Dome for America? So this is a major new initiative. It got $25 billion in the budget this year, and there's going to be, I think, about 175 or $200 billion over the next several years. But it's a major initiative to modernize all of our air and missile defense for the United States. And there's a whole bunch of new threats going on. But dial back the clock to 1958, and there was this idea that you could use this thing called a digital computer. So MIT was involved in this project called Whirlwind with some other companies. And these, I mean, so think about like, it's kind of like less than the power of an average pocket calculator in a room about this size. And the idea was that you could use these digital computers and integrate together all of these radars that we had around the nation and have an actual way to detect if there were threats coming in, bombers and things like that. And so Lincoln spun out this organization called MITRE in 1958. And so now, 65 plus years later, we like to think of ourselves as sort of, Lincoln Lab and MIT's most famous spin-out. And so MITRE's been called the most important company you've never heard of, and that's because a lot of the work that we do is sort of under the radar, literally and figuratively. We do a lot of work for the Department of Defense. We do a lot of work for the intelligence community. But so I lead the part that is in national security, so all of the Department of Defense intelligence work. But I wanted to highlight, the breadth of impact that these federally funded research and development centers like Lincoln Laboratory, like MITRE have across our nation. So we also run federally funded research and development centers that support the Veterans Administration. You say, well, why does the Veterans Administration? So think about like electronic health records for all of our soldiers and all of our veterans and having a uniform system so that you can track and look at the efficacy of treatment and how to improve patient outcomes. So that's an example of the kinds of high-tech work that we do in the Veterans Administration. Same kinds of things for Center for Medicare and Medicaid. So understanding like what drives drug prices up nationally and what are the things that the United States can do to bring down the cost of medication. I think all of us, we have parents and grandparents that worry about these kinds of things, and so these are really important areas. Federal Aviation Administration. So we run what's called CASD, which is the Center for Advanced Aviation Safety and Development. And CASD has been running a program that collects data from all the airlines, from pilots' unions, so from a whole bunch of people that compete fiercely against each other and don't want to share their data with anybody. But because of the way we're constructed, they can share our data with us. And you see now the aviation safety record in the United States is just, you go years, and we've had a tough year this year. We had a crash. Obviously a major fatal crash in the Washington, D.C. area. But our record over the past several years, you typically go years without a major fatal aviation fatality. So those are the kinds of things, like when you think about why should the federal government do research, these are the kinds of outcomes that we have. And it goes on beyond that, So cybersecurity standards, I think everybody, you see the headlines every day. So we got people that are working on embedded security and other cyber activities right here. you see every day, some major hack, Qantas, 6 million people with their records exposed a couple of weeks ago, and it just goes on and on. You see that, nation-state adversaries are getting caught embedding malicious code in critical infrastructure. Think our water, our power systems, our financial systems, telecommunications systems. And so creating standards and methods to understand, like, what are all those issues that people could be, or those things that adversaries can be doing, and how can you systematically go about mitigating those risks and putting those attackers out of business. So those are I just wanted to highlight. Now, this is the kind of stuff that we get excited about. And then I'm going to talk more about my origins, right, which is more in the space and defense side of things. But I really wanted to highlight, as you think about the things that you're doing today in this program, these things lead directly to outcomes that have really, really important impacts for literally billions of people around the world. So I hope, are you excited about that? A little bit excited? Yeah. All right. Is it, what's the word, Bob? What is BWSI? All right. I know the drill after 10 years now. So why am I standing here in front of you? And I wanted to really kind of lay out 3 areas of my story. So there was my time at MIT, and my time at a company called Lockheed Martin, which does a lot of very interesting aerospace and defense work. You probably heard of the F-35 aircraft, for example, or Sikorsky helicopters, or GPS satellites. I mean, these are some of the things that Lockheed Martin does. And then I want to talk a little bit about MITRE. And the key message that I want to get out there, like, I mentioned all these things that, colleagues work on that are critically important to the nation, to the world. And this idea that, you can work in mission-driven areas and really make a difference is something that's really stuck with me over my career. And so that idea of mission success is really important. The second thing that I wanted to really talk about, this is in some ways the most exciting time to be in areas like space, aviation, technology, cybersecurity. I mean, the pace at which things are happening right now is just incredible. So I hope that you're excited after, you got 3.5 more days, I guess, but keep that momentum going as you go forward into your next studies. I wanted to highlight a little bit, like, what you're doing right now, use this as the model, and I'll talk a little bit about continuous learning, right? This is where you should be your entire life. I want to highlight a little bit about, this opportunity. I talk about mission, but you should also think about the opportunity for service and the opportunity to give back. And Bob and I work with, this is, what we're doing here, this is exciting and it's our passion, but we also see it as a service, right? A service to the nation, a service to the next generation, a service to the advancements of science and technology. And it is an opportunity to give back. And then finally, I want to wrap up with a little bit about, like, responsibilities. As you go into engineering and science, like, there are real responsibilities, and I'll talk about how I see that. So I started here in 1985. Did they meet Dan Hastings by any chance? No? So Dan Hastings, a professor over in the Aero-Astro department. He is the president of the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics. He's a former department head. He's a former vice provost, he's done almost every job you can do at MIT, I think. But been an inspiration. He started as an assistant professor that same year that I started. And so the reason I bring it up is because I'm going to be the incoming president of the AIAA, which I'll come back to again at the end here. But I just want to put that seed, there's this sort of lineage. So my old professor, he's not old, but my professor, and now I've been following him around since 1985 because he's been such an inspiration. 1986, January of 1986, there was a really momentous event in the space program. Does anybody remember what that was? Yeah, I know this is before your time, but anybody know what happened in January of 1986? Got somebody? Please. Right. So the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded. And this was at the point, basically, where I'm choosing what my major is going to be. And at that point, I said, you know what? Like, this space program is really important. It was so visible at that moment in time. Turned out, I think that was the largest aeronautics and astronautics class that MIT has ever had that particular year, so I was not alone. But that was a really pivotal moment. And the other thing that really struck me is that small things can have very large consequences, but that engineering and good engineering and conscientious engineering can make the difference between a good outcome and a terrible outcome, a disaster, right? And so that's something, and I'll come back to this theme of mission success and personal accountability. But that led me into eventually working for MITRE. I asked if people heard of Golden Dome, so draw that thread from Golden Dome to the SAGE program, that first integrated air and missile defense. So I came in 1987, I guess it was, and I'm working on this thing called the Strategic Defense Initiative. Ronald Reagan is the president at that time. He was, widely considered like a madman for this idea that we could actually defend against ballistic missiles on a national scale. And so I wanted to point out two things. One is that sometimes it takes that seed to actually lead to long-term successful programs. And so many of the programs, so what was SDI, Strategic Defense Initiative, became known as the Ballistic Missile Defense Organization, BMDO, which then became what is today the Missile Defense Agency, one of the major sponsors of MIT Lincoln Laboratory, also of MITRE. And so many of these successes, so you have ground-based interceptors that defend parts of the United States, for example. You have integrated sensing networks that detect inbound missiles, including space-based assets. You have theater assets that protect both ships and land areas as well. And so all of this sort of came out of these ideas that were generated back in that time. And I had the opportunity, I came in, anybody know what a Kalman filter is here? Yeah. All right. So I walk into my first day, and they hand me a book, I remember it clearly, paperback, dog-eared copy, Gelb's Optimal Estimation. I think it was second edition. Arthur Gelb, former MIT professor. And they said, we need you to do a simple Kalman filter. It's got to run on a Mac computer. And a Mac in those days was not the supercomputers you're used to. But through the course of that summer and then the next 2 years, I was able to do work, and it was a small piece, but it actually got implemented into some of the missile tracking and discrimination software that eventually, went out into some of these systems. And so, I feel like even as, a sophomore, junior, senior in college, you have this ability to work on really interesting and really hard problems. And so, again, to my point about what you're doing right now, to keep thinking, realizing you can do these things going forward. And so I'll put a shameless plug for like interns as you're thinking about what you want to do during your college summers. Lincoln Laboratory, MITRE, it took, here I am 30 odd years later, but back after that internship, running MITRE's FFRDC for the Department of Defense. But at that point, I made a little bit of a change. I said, I'm really interested in the space program. And so I was really excited about what I do. And that internship experience actually put me on the track to go into avionics and then to guidance, navigation, and control and estimation, which I did for my master's and my PhD thesis. But I was really interested in human spaceflight. And so I ended up going and working on 2 shuttle missions, and this was all, and I had this idea like, hey, maybe I'd like to be an astronaut. So just in case you're wondering, I did never actually become an astronaut. I've not yet flown in space, but I have not given up. But I was really excited about the idea that, humans would have a long-term presence in space. Now, as long as you have been alive, there have been humans living continuously in space, which is kind of an amazing thing, because when I was a kid, that was not the case. People went up for, a couple days, a few days at a time, maybe to the moon and back. but certainly not having long-term, decade after decade, continuous on-orbit habitation. And so thinking like I could actually do something that would make that possible. And so I got to work on 2 space life sciences missions in the Space Lab. And I wanted to make a couple of observations. Like, one is it's hard to get your head around the infrastructure that it requires to do at scale, like orbital operations, not just, getting stuff to space, but then sustaining the operations in space, getting people home safely. And so this was something that opened up my eyes to the importance of systems thinking, right? And what really struck me, I'd go down to Kennedy Space Center, and this is in the days when, as a student, basically they give you a badge and you could go anywhere you wanted. Things are a little more secure now. I'd say they're a lot more secure now. But basically, I could go into the vertical assembly building and be up there, 40 stories, looking down on, shuttles being assembled, or you have thousands of people working on the shuttles in these different areas, or you'd go up on the pad. And you're standing there, you're next to the space shuttle, you got the white room where the astronauts kind of walk out, and you're 2 days from launch. And you think about it, there's going to be 6 or 7 people on this space shuttle. And you're looking across thousands of acres of Florida launch site capability, massive facilities to build these rockets, to process the orbiters. And then you think about, there's like tens of thousands of people, all to take those 6 or 7 folks and put them in space. And so what got me excited, like, these are the kinds of things, if you want to think about big engineering, right? All of that was done by folks like yourselves who went out there and said, hey, we can make something that is going to take people into space, allow them ultimately to live in space on a long duration perspective. So again, think about, this is not individual pieces, but somebody had to architect that whole thing and really think about what is it going to take over a long period of years. And so that was one of the things that got me excited about big engineering, and that led me on to other things in life. But the points I wanted to make twofold. One is, try to work with that system view, right? And think about, like, okay, what are the pieces that have to come together? Because as you move up in your career, those are the harder problems often that you're going to get asked to solve. And 2 is, don't be afraid to make a change. Like, I pivoted from this, very like missile defense focused area, which I loved, but then went over, found out I could use much the same math, applied math essentially, to do modeling of human performance and understanding, like, so what we were doing, my job was to essentially make astronauts puke. You laugh, right? But we would put these astronauts, we'd spin them, we'd put them in moving rooms or rotating fields of view. And then we would test and see, like, what was happening with their inner ears, with their eye movements, with their muscle movements. And then we would see how they adapt, because all these things change when you go into spaceflight. You go into zero gravity. You have all kinds of metabolic, physical, fluid shifts when you go into space. And so understanding how you're going to mitigate that and keep people safe for, if you're going to go to Mars, maybe up to 2 years in some cases, and back, these are the kinds of questions that you have to answer. So it's not just building the things that get them there and get them safely home, but understanding all the things that go into keeping people up in space. So there's endless variety, and there's always an opportunity to think about, like, what's next, and what could I be learning in the next set of things. But I always had that idea, like, I want to be part of making these big things happen. And so when I left graduate school, I ended up going to Lockheed Martin. And the reason I chose Lockheed Martin at that point in time, A, because it's California, I grew up in Hawaii, so I wanted to get a little bit closer to home. But B, they had a part of all of the major space programs that were going on. So there was human space flight associated with the shuttle and space station. There was work on all kinds, like the missions associated with going to Mars, so all the Mars missions. We were doing commercial telecommunications satellites. We were building classified work. We were building satellites that had to do with military capabilities. And so I thought, this is like an amazing place to go if I want to be in space. And my big takeaway there, do you think it's exciting to launch something up and see that work? I mean, it's one of these amazing things. Like, you do all this design work, you simulate everything, you program everything, you test everything. Sometimes it takes years to build these things. And then you put them on the booster, and you shoot them up there, and then you wait. And then all of a sudden, telemetry, there's a very complex system to get it there, but wherever the satellite is, it gets to a ground station. The ground station probably routes it through some sort of terrestrial network. It gets into your secure facility. It gets processed, decommutated, and it shows up on a screen, and then you got numbers and lines. You're like, is it working the way I thought it was going to work? And then you have this huge sigh of relief. That's the good case. Remember, I started with the space shuttle, right? My very first launch was a billion-dollar satellite called Milstar 3. What happened in that case, the satellite actually worked great, except there was a problem with the booster upper stage called the Centaur, and it ended up dropping. This is supposed to go to geostationary orbit. It dropped it off in a low Earth orbit in a tumbling configuration. And that was, so that was essentially the end of that mission, because there's no way to get the satellite from this very kind of low energy orbit all the way up to geo. The best we could do was try to move it out of the way of the Iridium constellation at that point, so that we didn't have on-orbit collisions. And this was exceptionally challenging because it was dropped off at this high-rate tumble, so it actually broke the satellite at that point during the deployments. And so we had to come up with all these crazy control laws to move the thing, a little bit at a time. But as they traced back what happened, it turned out that it was a ground database, so a set of parameters that modeled the orbital, the orbital rate. But when you're on the ground, you have what's called Earth rate, right? You go around once every 24 hours. So they had put a test database in for that. The test database didn't get swapped out. There are all these controls to try to make sure these things don't happen. And at the end of the day, they launched with this test database, which was wrong for the actual orbital conditions. It gets even worse. It turns out that a test engineer on the ground had, as they were prepping for launch, had noticed that the data didn't look quite right. And they had called somebody to say, hey, there's something wrong. But it turned out that person was out of the office for a couple of days. The message never got through. And ended up with a mission loss of, call it $1 billion satellite and probably a $400 million booster, right? But even worse than that is the mission, right? Because and it's since been replaced by a more modern system. But at that time, the hardened nuclear command and control backbone for all of the communications that go between the military services up to the, like the President of the United States. So it's a problem when you don't get these things where they need to get to. And so I wanted to, and I'm going to wrap up here in about a minute, but I really wanted to say, again, as you think about the importance of mission success, and I look back and I kind of laugh. Like, we were obviously all very distraught when this happened. We took a few weeks to get everything kind of where we needed to get it buttoned up, and then we turned off the satellite. Somebody wrote a song that was like, the Ode to Milstar Flight 3. Like, people sang this thing. There were tears in their eyes, and you kind of laugh about that. But it was a really career-shaping event for me. And it really brought home, as engineers, we do have a responsibility and accountability to these incredibly important missions, right? Like, in an age of spin and virtual reality, you can say a lot of things, but at the end of the day, the hardware never lies. That was sort of a mantra we had. The hardware never lies. Like, if you do bad engineering, the bridge will fall down, or the wing will come off the airplane, or your satellite will end up someplace it's not supposed to end up. So you have this incredible power, this ability to make amazing things happen that have never happened before. But then there comes a really important responsibility to make sure that you're delivering on the missions that we've committed to. And that's something that has been super important to me throughout my life. And so I want to wrap up with one last story, and this gets to moving on at Lockheed Martin. That was an example. I talk about these programs that people have never heard of, right? And a lot of this stuff was classified back at the time, and so I'd go home to my wife, or I'd talk to my kids, and they'd be like, yeah, we don't know what you're talking about. Obviously, I couldn't tell them a lot of the things. Anybody heard of GPS? So then I got, for a while, to run the GPS program. So I did part of what was called Block 2 of GPS, and then ran the GPS 3 program, so a whole new set of GPS satellites. And at the time, I want to highlight the importance, because the reason, you have to go back to an incident, and this goes back to the 80s and 90s, but there was a Korean airliner. Korean Airlines was shot down mistakenly by a Russian air defense system. And at that time, President Reagan said, well, we're going to have this GPS system, and we're going to turn off what was called selective availability at the time, and open this up free to the world so that people can navigate anywhere, and you won't have airplanes ending up where they're not supposed to be. And you think about that. Like, today, you have on your phone, centimeter level precision to guide you anywhere in the world. So think about airliners being shot down because they don't know where they are, to what you have in your pockets today. That is what GPS has enabled. So as I think about, again, when you have an opportunity to work on really big things. So today, GPS touches several billion people at any given moment in time. The last estimate, I think it was 2015, was the first year that more than 1 billion GPS-enabled devices were made. $90 billion or more of economic value generated every year based on the abilities that are delivered. Think about Uber, think about banking systems, all this stuff. So a huge, I would say it's probably the single best investment that the US government has ever made for those, few $billion they invested in GPS to create $90 billion of economic value every year. So this is what gets me fired up about being able to do cool engineering. And then I mentioned the systems of systems engineering as well. And so here I am at MITRE, and I'm going to bring back to where I started, that Golden Dome example. So now, if we think about what it takes to defend, in those days we were worried about bombers and a few missiles. Now we're worried about cruise missiles, we're worried about small unmanned aerial systems. We are worried about one-way attack drones, like the list of threat, hypersonic vehicles that maneuver and can essentially go under radar coverage or otherwise evade defenses. So now we need a whole new sensing set of capabilities. We need a whole new set of ways to get after all of these different threats, whether it's missiles or other capabilities. We need much smarter systems to be able to integrate all this stuff together to say, okay, who's sensing what can we do about it, who should shoot at it. So these are the kinds of neat problems. Now you start talking about systems of systems and the integration of all of that. And so again, as I think about big problems and solving big problems, these are the kinds of things that you have the opportunity to do. And that kind of gets me back to that mission piece as well. So I just encourage you to think about opportunities to serve major missions as engineers in the future where you will have global impact. And it might be some of the things that I've talked about, but you think about like the development of AI systems that are fundamentally changing the way we live and work, right? You think about new agricultural science that's being developed in labs around MIT here. These are the kinds of things, no matter what field you go into, you can have an enormous impact. And then I'll just finally say, coming back to that idea of the opportunity to serve. I hope, that, how many TAs do we have in the room here today? So these are all folks that have gone through the program and are now back again. I mean, that's the kind of thing where, you know, the opportunity to continue to pay it forward. So first of all, congratulations. Thank you to all the TAs. And then I also want to say a big thank you to all the instructors and all the staff that make BWSI happen. But I'll just say there's an engineering community. There's an engineering community here at MIT. There's an engineering community regionally. There's an engineering community nationally. I mentioned the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics as an example, but there are many other professional societies. I'll just encourage you, like, we live in a very rich world where there's so much to do, and that world, that environment only gets richer as you take part and give back and be a part of these communities. And so I'll just put a plug out there, you know, whether it's AIAA or any of these other professional societies or organizations like that. You know, people like Bob and myself, Dan Hastings, who I mentioned, these have been incredibly important parts of our careers, you know, like literally from the time I was an undergraduate student to where I am today, that have brought incredible benefits to my career, but I feel also bring incredible benefits to all of us together. So I'll just say, put in a plug for, as you think about, you're going to go off and you're going to do amazing things, but also think over time for those opportunities to continue to give back to the community. I'm going to stop here and answer questions.
Can we just congratulate Keoki for being the president-elect of AIAA next year?
Go AIAA. Is anybody here a member of the AIAA? All right, we got a couple. Is there a fee as a high school student member? It's free. So I'm just going to say, go online, sign up for AIAA.
All right, so we're going to start with our questions. We'll do 2 in person and alternate with online with Janaya. So I'm going to start on this side. Do you have any questions?
Got somebody up here in the middle. And could you introduce yourself and just say who you are and where you're from?
Tom, can you get up there?
In
Thank
the
you.
red shirt right there in the middle.
Hi, I'm Dinesh. I'm from the Boston area. Thank you for your talk. So I was mainly wondering, like how you and your team dealt with the loss of the Milstar satellite and how you use takeaways in that to advance your career.
Yeah, and it's a great question, and you know, unfortunately, things like this do happen. And I want to emphasize, there's never a zero risk position. We try to reduce the risks, but at the end of the day, if you're going to make progress, you have to take risk. And so you got to always have that in the back of your mind. There's a couple of things. One is you always want to understand the root causes so you can try to prevent those things from happening again. And so the first thing you always do, you stand up a failure review board, you go through, you know, all of the, so there, obviously I laid out this chain of events. There were several places where this could have been caught along the way, right? And so you want to, it's not just that there was a bad database value, but you want to understand all the contributing factors. And then you do a systematic approach to mitigating or changing your designs, changing your processes, changing your hardware, depending on what the root causes are. And so that's the very first thing, and I kind of think of that as the basic. But then, and this is, I mean, you may be asking me, why is this guy up here talking about blowing stuff up in space, right? And honestly, that is a way that we learn. And if you look at the way SpaceX does their design, they take a much higher risk profile because their view is if we move faster, we will learn faster. And that will enable us to get to a higher reliability, get up that reliability curve a lot faster. So the reason I'm bringing up here is there's a huge element of education and understanding as well, so that people are aware. You have to ask questions. As an engineer, your responsibilities, you've got an assignment, right, perhaps, that you're going to do this. So we're all in teams here, right? And everybody's divvied up the work a little bit. But it doesn't work if you're just focused on your little piece. You kind of have to look left and right and say, okay, how is this all fitting together? And that gets more and more important, as you take on bigger and bigger scope and scale activities. So there was a big education effort out of that to, not just say, here were the lessons learned, but how can we think about more broadly systems for continuous improvement, approaches to highlighting areas where there have been escapes so that the whole group can benefit, because at that time, Lockheed Martin Space, I think, was about 20,000 people. You got maybe 1,000 or so working on this project, but you want everybody to learn from that. So kind of promulgating those lessons and the knowledge sharing across is a key piece. And then coming back to, I use these examples because I think it's important, if I can get that message out there, disciplined engineering, accountability as an engineer, the responsibility to the mission and mission success, and continue to broadcast that, I think it's good for all of us. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
But yeah, it was a very difficult time. We had to rapidly try to get the next satellite up there. We had to try to accelerate the follow-on constellation. So yeah, I mean, it was a really important recovery activity.
Hello, I'm Xuan. I'm from the Bay Area in California. My question for you
What town are you
is
from? What town are you from?
town, San Jose.
All right, I lived in Mountain View and Redwood City for a long time. So when I was out at Lockheed Martin.
Okay. So you are in a very important leadership position at MITRE currently. So this can be for now or like maybe like in previous years, but in your like as a leader, what do you think is like the most important like kind of role that you play either for your team or for like the project as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of answers to that. If I think about where you spend your time, I mean, as sort of I'm basically the director of the organization. So the strategy for the organization, and that's not just the business strategy. And more as you get to these leadership roles, you have to think about the business as well as the technical. And sometimes that's hard. Is that I love engineering and I love to nerd out on interesting problems, but I have to take a step back and say, that's not my direct job anymore. I need to be focused on, is the whole organization going where it needs to go? And so as I think about things like strategy, you have to divide it up into the business elements, the mission elements, essentially what work, why are you doing that work, and why is it important? But then you have to think about things like organizational design. And do I have the organization optimized for the benefit of the missions that we're trying to accomplish, but also, this is the reality. Like, engineering is a people profession, right? And I talked about all those interfaces. I talked about the team dynamics. And so you have to think very hard about what does it take to make our people successful, not just on small teams, but in the entire organizational structure. And that can be very complicated as, like customer needs change. So now you have to pivot to the kind of work you're doing. Technology changes, so now you have to upskill your workforce or retrain your workforce. So people remember what I said about continuous learning? Continuous learning is a thing. So make sure, if you're not learning, it's time to take a step back, say, I want to do something else. And that's something I've pursued my entire life. And then a third important element, I mean, as a senior leader, the culture of the organization is absolutely critical. And it's amazing to see how quickly a culture can kind of turn toxic if it's not, strengthened, reinforced, invested in. And so that's another, I mean, you could say, is that strategy? I think you can't have strategy without a culture that supports the strategy. And I want to make 2 points. I talked a lot about accountability as engineers and the responsibility to those mission outcomes. Integrity and ethics are absolutely critical elements. I've found, I'd like to say, of the engineering profession, But I look at that as, I think they're indispensable elements of leadership as well. And that doesn't mean that you always do everything right in every instance, but it does mean, you are trying to set a standard that your entire organization, so it's, like truth and trust are important. Reputations and trust are very difficult to build over time. They're very easily lost. And so I use those as examples of culture that are critically important. The kinds of organizations that Bob and I serve as leaders, they are areas of public trust. The US government and other governments have entrusted our organizations to do incredibly important things for the security of the people of those nations, and particularly the United States. And so, things like ethics, integrity, and the culture that rewards and celebrates those aspects is really important. So I hope that helps.
All right, let's switch over to virtual. Janaya, can you please pick 2 people?
Yeah, we'll have.
Yeah.
So we'll have Jimmy Chen.
Can you wave for me so I can see you? Oh, there you are.
Hi,
All right.
Dr. Jackson. I'm Jimmy. I'm from North Carolina. I saw online that in 2008, 11 years after you finished your doctorate at MIT, you attended the Stanford Executive Program. You previously mentioned how it's extremely important for continuous learning. I just was wondering what prompted your decision to return back to like a sort of like a more university curriculum, and how that prompted or impacted your career 17 years later now.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'll tell you what was going through my mind. So I talked about my journey kind of working on very specific, technical issues to working on larger and more complex systems. And I realized at that point, so I was on the verge, I was managing probably about a $300 million project, but it was a part of a roughly $10 billion system. And I was managing a team, I guess it was probably 120 people or something like that. And I was working with a set of subcontractors around the country. And I realized, like, what does it take if I was to be running this entire program, or if I was to be running this company? Like, I realized I wasn't equipped, right? And so I said, look, I'm starting to see the importance of the things that I talked about. What do we worry about as senior leaders? Strategy, the business elements, organizational design and organizational behavior, culture. And that's where I said, I think it's time for me to go. I actually had planned to do an MBA, and so go do a full year MBA. And I pretty much had that lined up. And this is the other thing, like, you have to be agile, and you have to be ready to pivot, because sometimes things intervene. But at that point, the president of my company at Lockheed Martin came and said, well, you could go do that, but if you do that, we won't be able to put you in some other place. And I said, well, what is that? Oh, well, I can't tell you. I said, well, what do you suggest? Go find something shorter. So I went and did this 2-month program. So I was embedded at Stanford Business School, Graduate School of Business, for a couple of months. In some ways, it was even better because I had senior leaders now around me, and this was an international group from all kinds of industries, from senior government leaders, and you're sitting there jammed together for 2 months straight. And so I got a healthy dose of everything from accounting to public relations to the strategy, the business, all of those elements. And that really equipped me to take on the next role, which at that point then they sent me out to be the deputy program manager for GPS-3. And then a few months later, I became the program manager and then the vice president of that. And so sometimes you have to trust that other people are watching out for you. But I think if I hadn't stood up and said, like, this is something that's important to me to continue to demonstrate growth and business acumen, people might not appreciate that these are the kinds of aspirations that you have. So I'll just say, don't hesitate to tell people that you're working for or working with what you aspire to, and they will oftentimes help you think through what it'll take to get there. So So take advantage of that and don't hold back. Like if you have something that you really think is important you want to do, let people know.
Thank you. And then we'll have Hafsa.
Hi, Hafsa. Jimmy's still there.
Oh, did they put their hand down? Never mind. Okay, we'll have a. Oh, sorry.
Hi, my name's Hafsa. I'm from New Jersey, and my question was like, what ethics do you take into like consideration when you work in like a defense company, and like, what is like a situation that you would say really put up like your morality in question?
Yeah, it's a really important question. And first of all, I talked about the importance just of, ethical and high integrity behavior, and I'd say that's true regardless. And then, but it's particularly important where you're working on consequential missions that impact, thousands, millions, billions of people in some cases. And you'll have to tell me a little bit about your background behind you before we're done here. So I think the hardest things, honestly, you get people, oftentimes they are people decisions, right? And so I talked about business changes. I mean, I've had to take very hard business decisions. One time I was involved in closing down a site with about 3,000 people, right? Which, and a lot of those people ended up moving to other locations and so on, but that's a huge, devastating disruption. And yet, if we hadn't done that, it would have had a huge damaging effect to the broader business. And so even though it's one of those things like, this is the right thing to do to preserve not just the business, but all the missions that the business supports. And yet it is an extremely painful and uncomfortable thing, for everybody involved, but certainly, as a leader, you have to, you're accountable for making these decisions, and they're hard decisions. Also say, and I think this is important, a lot of the things I've worked on are, defensive in nature, but they are effectively weapon systems. And, the reason we build a lot of these things, I've been involved in nuclear programs and so on, nuclear command and control systems, like I mentioned. I served on the board of the Sandia Corporation, which is a critical, what's called one of the tri-labs, the weapons labs for the Department of Energy. And we do these things because we hope they will never have to be used, right? We hope every day that they will never have to be used. But we inherently, and this is something I believe, and looking over thousands of years of history, is if you're not able to deter aggression, and we've seen this in the last century, we're seeing it playing out in Ukraine right now. But if you're not able to deter aggression and have the capabilities that are necessary to do that and do it credibly, at the end of the day, you do see this, that aggression does happen. And so, these are the kinds of very difficult challenges that senior leaders, particularly at a policy level and in the government, have to deal with every day, because there are no easy answers and there are no easy solutions. But our job, in the kinds of work that I do, is to make sure that those leaders have the tools at their disposal to be able to deter when the time comes.
Okay, all right. I think we have time for one more question before our t-shirt presentation. Oh, does Bob have a question? Okay.
All right, I'm a little nervous now.
This is first time I'm asking the question, but first of all, thank you so much for pointing out the opportunity for the BWSI students to join AIAA.
Don't forget MITRE. Come to MITRE as well.
Yeah, right. Okay.
And Lincoln Laboratory.
Right, but then I think I didn't realize the high school students can join AIAA for free of charge. So
Bob is a fellow of the AIAA. Just so give a big.
But thank you. But my so thank you. So my question is, so we won't make the joining AIAA one of the exit criteria, but I really do hope that you consider joining AIAA. So when they join AIAA as high school students, what are some of the things they could be doing to stay engaged, like working with their peers, working with the older professionals, maybe even working with the middle school students? I mean, what would you recommend they do?
Yeah, so there are, I mean, I know many of you are sort of on the verge of going to your next step. And so I think a lot of this, I mean, there's extensive K through 12 activities, I mean, for across that entire spectrum. And if you go to the AIAA website, you can see more about those activities. But things that I'd call out in particular that I hope you'll think about in the future: design, build, fly. And so these are contests where, you know, typically university teams, I think some high school teams, but from around the world come together and compete for different design competitions. And so I hope that I will see some of you in the next couple of years at Design, Build, Fly. So if you see me there, please come up and say hi. But those are the kinds of things that I find just really exciting. The other things I'd recommend is there are local chapters all over the United States and internationally. I'm pretty sure there's a chapter in Japan. I don't know if there's chapters in Italy and Greece. I'll have to go do a little research on there. But we do have chapters. And I will say we are always starting new chapters. So if there's not a chapter near you in the future, you might think about starting a chapter. But anyway, those local organizations and regional organizations give you an opportunity to get engaged in conferences, in research presentations, in meeting, you know, faculty and professors at different universities, in interacting with people at companies who are doing pretty cool stuff, like cooler stuff than I've done in my life, right?
All right, so we're, okay, yeah. Okay, we'll now have our t-shirt presentation, so will our lovely students from Embedded Security please come up?
Hi, I'm Daniel Zane from Embedded Security, and I wanted to say thank you for your talk today.
Is your project done? You're going to be done by, what is it, Saturday morning is the deadline?
Yeah,
Yeah?
our project.
All right. All right, sorry to interrupt. Daniel, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. I wanted to say thank you for your talk today. I appreciate how you shared your lessons from all the areas in life that you've been through. And especially your message really resonated with me about how it feels to be inspired working on a large project and just knowing you have an impact and giving back to the communities around you while preserving integrity and ethics.
Hi, I'm Advika. I'm also from Embedded Security. I'd like to thank you for your talk today, and I really appreciated learning about your journey in Lockheed Martin, especially like your satellite project. It really showed the importance of learning together and the idea of like continuous learning in big engineering. And I also really liked how you connected your work with the bigger picture, for example, your GPS project. And honestly, your career path is really cool, and congrats on your new position at AIAA. And to thank you, BWSI would like to present you with a shirt.
All right. Put it on right now.
Oh, yeah.
Honorary member here. Thank you very much, Daniel. Thank you very much.
Once wait.
Let me get the shirt on.
So let's give a big round of applause to Keoki and thank him for his time today.